Elijah, the Tishbite, emerges in the pages of the Bible as an enigmatic and powerful figure, whose life was marked by miracles and a bold calling. His name, meaning "My God is the Lord," already reveals much about his mission, to confront a people who had strayed from true worship. He came from Tishbe, a small village in Gilead, a mountainous and little-known region. Despite his humble origins, Elijah was chosen to be a spokesman for God during a time of rampant idolatry and corruption in Israel. At that time, the people were torn between worshiping the Lord and following pagan gods like Baal, encouraged by King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Elijah was not one to mince words. He abruptly appeared in the biblical narrative, declaring to the king that there would be neither rain nor dew in Israel until he, as a prophet, proclaimed otherwise. This drought, a divine judgment, was a clear signal that the people needed to return to the right path. With courage, Elijah stood out as a defender of God's covenant. Even in the face of opposition and danger, he demonstrated that, no matter how much the world around us drifts from the truth, those who trust in the Lord can rise as a light amidst the darkness. Elijah teaches us that God uses the unlikely to accomplish great things, challenging kings and nations in the name of justice. Miracles at the brook of Cherith. After confronting King Ahab with the prophecy of a devastating drought, Elijah received an unexpected command from God, to flee and hide by the brook of Cherith in the wilderness. There, isolated from everyone, the prophet experienced God's supernatural care in a unique and miraculous way. The brook provided fresh water to quench his thirst during the drought, while ravens, creatures often considered unclean in Jewish tradition, were used by God to bring him bread and meat daily. This chapter of Elijah's life was not merely a time of refuge, but also one of learning and complete dependence on God. In solitude, he witnessed that the same God who controls nature also provides for his servants in extraordinary ways, even through improbable means. It was a time of quiet and divine provision, preparing him for the even greater challenges ahead. However, the brook, which had seemed a source of security, began to dry up because of the very drought Elijah had prophesied. This challenging event was not a sign of abandonment, but rather a call for Elijah to trust even more in God's plans, as the next step in his journey was already being prepared. Elijah's story at the brook of Cherith teaches us that God attends to every detail of the lives of those who trust him, even in the most barren deserts. He uses the improbable and the extraordinary to show that his provision never fails, but also invites us to move forward when the time for change arrives. The miracle at the widow's house in Zarephath. After his time at the brook of Cherith, God commanded Elijah to go to Zarephath, a small village in a foreign land, where a widow would care for him. This command was somewhat unexpected. Zarephath was not an Israelite city but belonged to Sidon, the land of the Phoenicians, demonstrating that God's care transcends borders. When Elijah arrived in the village, he found the widow on the brink of despair. Gathering sticks, she told the prophet that she had only a handful of flour and a little oil left. Her plan was to prepare one final meal for herself and her son before succumbing to starvation. The situation was dire, yet Elijah, trusting in God's word, made a request that seemed almost unthinkable, for her to first make a small piece of bread for him. Despite her extreme poverty, the widow chose to believe. She did as Elijah asked, and the result was an extraordinary miracle. The flour and oil did not run out throughout the entire drought, providing enough sustenance for her, her son, and the prophet. This act of faith not only met their physical needs, but also showcased God's power to care for those who trust him, even in the direst crises. The Great Challenge on Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel was the scene of one of the most dramatic and decisive moments in Elijah's life. Israel was experiencing a period of deep idolatry, led by King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, who had introduced the worship of the pagan god Baal. To confront this situation, Elijah, directed by God, called for a great challenge, to prove who the true God was, Yahweh or Baal. The challenge brought together the people of Israel and 450 prophets of Baal on the heights of Mount Carmel. Elijah proposed that 2 altars be prepared, one for Baal and one for Yahweh. The test was simple. The God who answered by sending fire from heaven would be proven to be the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. From morning until afternoon, they cried out, danced, and even injured themselves in desperation, but no answer came. Baal's silence was deafening. Then, it was Elijah's turn. He rebuilt the altar of Yahweh using 12 stones, symbolizing the tribes of Israel, and did something unusual. He ordered the altar to be drenched with water, making the human impossibility of igniting a fire even more evident. Afterward, he prayed simply yet fervently, asking God to demonstrate his power and turn the people's hearts back to him. Immediately, fire fell from heaven, consuming the burnt offering, the stones, the water, and even the dust around the altar. The crowd, awestruck, proclaimed, "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" This event not only exposed the falsehood of Baal, but also reaffirmed Yahweh's power and sovereignty. Mount Carmel became a defining moment, calling the people to repentance and true worship. Elijah's flight and his encounter with God on Mount Horeb. After the dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel, Elijah hoped that the people of Israel would fully turn back to God. However, upon hearing what had happened, Queen Jezebel remained unrepentant. Enraged, she vowed revenge and swore to take Elijah's life. Fearing for his safety, the prophet fled, leaving behind the spotlight of the miracle and retreating into the wilderness, lonely and despondent. In the desert, overwhelmed by fear and despair, Elijah reached a breaking point, asking God to take his life. "It is enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Exhausted, he lay down under a broom tree and fell asleep. It was then that an angel, sent by God, woke him and offered him bread and water. With this divine provision, Elijah regained the strength to continue his journey. Elijah traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, where God had met with Moses centuries earlier. There, the prophet took refuge in a cave, still deeply troubled. Yet God called him to step outside, promising to reveal himself. In the decisive moment, Elijah witnessed a series of powerful events: a mighty wind, an earthquake, and a fire. But God was not in any of these destructive forces. After the fire came the sound of a gentle whisper, and in that profound silence, Elijah recognized the presence of God. The Creator spoke to his heart, renewing his mission and reminding him that he was not alone. God revealed that there were still 7,000 in Israel who had not bowed to Baal. This encounter on Mount Horeb was transformative for Elijah. He found the strength to resume his journey, assured that God was in control, even in the most difficult circumstances. In the quietness of that moment, Elijah learned that God's true manifestation is not always in the spectacular, but often in the intimate and unexpected. Elisha's call as Elijah's successor. After his life-changing encounter with God on Mount Horeb, Elijah returned to his mission with renewed purpose. Among the instructions he received was the task of choosing a successor, someone who would carry on the prophetic work of guiding the people of Israel. God directed him to Elisha, a simple man with a willing heart who lived in the countryside, tending to his daily responsibilities. Elijah found Elisha working in the field, plowing the land with 12 pairs of oxen. This detail highlights Elisha's diligence and commitment to his work. Without saying much, Elijah approached and cast his cloak over Elisha, a symbolic and powerful act representing the transfer of authority and God's calling on the young man's life. Elisha immediately understood the significance of this gesture. He realized that it was not merely an invitation but a divine call that would change his life forever. Before following Elijah, however, Elisha asked permission to bid farewell to his parents. Elijah allowed him to do so, enabling Elisha to close the chapter of his old life before beginning his new journey. In a defining act, Elisha slaughtered the oxen and burned the plowing equipment, using the wood as fuel for the fire. This symbolized his complete break from his former life. There was no turning back. Elisha was fully committed to God's call. From that moment on, Elisha accompanied Elijah as his servant and apprentice, witnessing firsthand the challenges and wonders of prophetic ministry. His humility and dedication in serving Elijah revealed the heart of a true disciple, someone willing to learn, grow, and, in due time, take on the mantle of leadership. Elisha's calling is an inspiring example of how God chooses ordinary people for extraordinary missions. It shows that a willing heart, combined with the determination to leave the past behind, can be powerfully used to fulfill divine purposes. For Elisha, this was just the beginning of a story that would impact generations. Naboth's vineyard and Elijah's confrontation with Ahab. King Ahab was notorious for his moral weakness and for the corrupting influence of his wife, Jezebel. His reign was marked by acts of idolatry and injustice. One emblematic episode that revealed Ahab's corrupt heart was the story of Naboth's vineyard, owned by a righteous and faithful man who possessed a small piece of land near the royal palace in Jezreel. Ahab coveted this vineyard to turn it into a garden, as it was conveniently located for him. He made Naboth an offer that seemed fair, to exchange the vineyard for a better piece of land or to purchase it for money. However, Naboth refused. To him, the vineyard was not merely property but a sacred inheritance from his ancestors, a gift that could neither be sold nor traded. Naboth's refusal left Ahab deeply frustrated. Like a petulant child, he withdrew to his palace, lay on his bed, and refused to eat. It was then that Jezebel intervened, determined to solve her husband's problem. With cold calculation and malice, she devised a plan to take Naboth's vineyard, showing utter disregard for justice and the fear of God. Jezebel wrote letters in the king's name, ordering that Naboth be falsely accused of blasphemy against God and the king. To carry out her plan, she enlisted corrupt men who gave false testimony against Naboth in a rigged trial. The result was tragic. Naboth was sentenced to death by stoning, and his vineyard was confiscated and given to Ahab. This abominable act did not escape God's notice. The prophet Elijah, steadfast in his mission to confront sin, was sent by the Lord to confront Ahab. Finding him in the vineyard that had been unjustly seized, Elijah spoke with boldness, delivering God's judgment upon Ahab and Jezebel. He declared that Naboth's blood cried out for justice and that a similar fate of ruin awaited both the king and his wife. Elijah's message was unequivocal. Human power does not stand above God's justice. Those who exploit the innocent to satisfy selfish desires will face the consequences of their actions. While Ahab expressed a momentary repentance, God's judgment remained firm and was fulfilled in the years that followed. The story of Naboth's vineyard teaches us the importance of standing for truth and justice, even in the face of great pressure. It also reminds us that God does not overlook the oppression of the innocent and that, in His perfect timing, His justice will prevail. Elijah and Ahaziah. The prophet confronts idolatry. After Ahab's death, his son Ahaziah ascended to the throne of Israel. However, like his father and mother, Jezebel, Ahaziah also turned away from God and followed the paths of idolatry. He worshipped Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, seeking guidance and help from this pagan idol instead of turning to the Lord of Israel. His encounter with Elijah occurred during a moment of great personal crisis. One day, Ahaziah suffered a serious accident. He fell from a window in the upper floor of his palace in Samaria, leaving him gravely injured. Distraught over his condition, rather than calling upon God, Ahaziah sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, asking the false god of Ekron if he would recover from his injury. This act was a blatant insult to the God of Israel, the only one worthy of worship and the true source of healing and power. The Lord, knowing Ahaziah's heart, sent the prophet Elijah to confront his rebellion. Elijah intercepted Ahaziah's messengers on their way and delivered a stern message. Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Elijah declared that because of this betrayal of the living God, Ahaziah would surely die from his injury. The messengers immediately returned to the king with Elijah's message. Surprised by their swift return and troubled by the prophecy, Ahaziah asked who had delivered such words. They described a man with rustic clothing, a leather belt, and a striking presence. Ahaziah instantly recognized the man as Elijah, the prophet who had so often confronted his father. Enraged, Ahaziah sent a captain with 50 soldiers to seize Elijah. When they arrived at the hilltop where Elijah was, they commanded him to come down. But Elijah, fully trusting in God, responded, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." Instantly, heavenly fire descended and consumed the captain and his troops. Despite this, Ahaziah persisted in his attempt to capture Elijah, sending 2 more groups of 50 men. The second group met the same fiery fate. Only the third captain, approaching with humility and fear, pleaded for mercy. God then instructed Elijah to go with his captain to meet the king. Standing before Ahaziah, Elijah reiterated God's message. The king would not recover from his injury because he had rejected the Lord. And so it happened. Ahaziah died, leaving behind a legacy of idolatry and rebellion against God. This story serves as a powerful reminder that God does not share his glory with idols. Ahaziah chose to trust in a false god, but divine justice demonstrated that only the Lord is worthy of trust and worship. Once again, Elijah displayed courage and faithfulness in proclaiming God's truth, even in the face of powerful kings and armed forces. Final reflections on Elijah's ministry. Elijah's ministry stands out as one of the most remarkable and inspiring narratives in the Bible. He served as God's prophet during a time of deep idolatry and rebellion in Israel and is remembered as an ordinary man who faced fears, doubts, and extraordinary challenges. His journey is a living testament to how God chooses and equips imperfect people to fulfill extraordinary purposes. From his introduction as a solitary prophet from Tishbe to his ascension to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah carried out a mission of confronting kings, challenging false prophets, and restoring faith in God among the people of Israel. He displayed unwavering courage when facing Ahab, Jezebel, and the prophets of Baal, but he also showed his humanity when he fled to the wilderness, feeling dejected and fearful, and asked God to take his life. These moments of weakness remind us that even the greatest servants of God face internal struggles and moments of discouragement. Elijah's ministry was marked by miracles that demonstrated the power of God. He was sustained by ravens at the brook of Cherith, multiplied the widow's food supply in Zarephath, and brought her son back to life. On Mount Carmel, Elijah was used by God to call down fire from heaven in an epic showdown with the prophets of Baal, providing undeniable proof that the Lord is the one true God. However, Elijah's legacy extends beyond these miracles. He teaches us about the power of prayer, faithfulness in times of crisis, and the importance of hearing God's voice in the stillness. On Mount Horeb, Elijah discovered that the Lord does not only manifest himself in spectacular events but also in a gentle whisper, showing that God is present even in the most quiet and personal moments of our journey. Another significant moment in his story is the calling of Elisha as his successor. Elijah invested in the next generation, passing the prophetic mantle to someone who would continue the mission of confronting sin and leading the people back to God. This reminds us that God's work does not rely on a single person, but is an ongoing mission carried out through his servants across generations. Elijah's ministry culminates in his extraordinary ascension to heaven in a chariot of fire, a unique event in the Bible that symbolizes God's approval of his faithfulness. But Elijah's story doesn't end there. He is mentioned again in the New Testament, appearing alongside Moses during Jesus' transfiguration, representing the prophets who pointed to the Messiah. Additionally, John the Baptist came in the spirit and power of Elijah, preparing the way for Christ. Reflecting on Elijah's life challenges us to trust God in difficult times, persevere in faith when everything around us seems lost, and listen for the Lord's voice even amidst chaos. His story is one of courage, faith, and restoration, inspiring us to live with integrity and obedience to God's calling, knowing that He is faithful to fulfill His promises. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Leave a comment sharing what you've learned about the prophet Elijah and how you can apply these lessons to your life. We're excited to hear your thoughts. See you in the next video, and may God bless your life.